We're going to start from verse number 20. Verse number 20, chapter 17 of the book of Kings 2. And we've been studying about Hoshea ben Elah, who was the final king of the Israelite kingdom. And what we've seen is that the Jewish people of the Israelite kingdom have all gone into exile. In chapter 15, we saw the first part of that exile, and that was where it mentions in the days of Pekach, who was the king before Hoshea ben Elah. It says Tiglath-Pileser came, the king of Ashur, Assyria, and he took all these cities, and he exiled them Ashura to Ashur. And at that point, it uses the term in the pasuk Kol Eretz Naphtali, all the lands of Naphtali. So that was one of the earlier exiles. We understand that there were 3 exiles, and one of them seems to have included, one of the earlier ones included Naphtali. Our verses seem to skip the exile of Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh. It doesn't seem to mention it here. It does mention it in the book of Chronicles. And then there's the final exile, which was in chapter 17, which, I mean, is in this chapter, but we learned it already. And that is where all of the final remnants of the exile of the 10 tribes. Now, this is not what we call the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. This is the exile of the 10 tribes. And it really was a period of time. First was a few tribes, then another few tribes, then it was finally all of them. And the actual verse that mentions the exile of the 10 tribes is here in this beginning of this chapter, where it says that he exiled Israel to Assyria in the 9th year of the reign of Hoshea, the king of Assyria, captured Samaria, which is the Shomron. He exiled Israel to Assyria. He settled them in all these different cities, Chala, Chabar, Gozan, and by the Gozan River, in the cities of Media. And we've been reading about all the sins that the Jewish people basically did. Now, I should mention, and I have a feeling this is what Mordechai wants to say. You want to mention the Gemara in Megillah about the return of the exile?
No,
I guess not. Oh, so what would
it
you like
was
to
about
say, Mordechai?
I think last week you mentioned that same Chairav and Tiglath-Pileser were the same
Same person.
person. And a couple of days ago in Daf Yomi in Sanhedrin, it mentioned he actually had 7 names.
Yeah, I think was it 7 or 8? Are you sure
7.
7? Oh, I thought it might have been 8 even.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
I
yeah.
know that
Actually, I think it.
Tiglath-Pileser, Sancheriv, Palneser, Shalmaneser, Pul, Sargon, Asan Peraba, and Vikira. So whatever. I think it's 8, but yeah, okay. Anyway, yes. Very, very nice. Okay, yeah. So he did have a number of names. There is a discussion in the later commentaries if they had 8 names, but could they have also been 8 different people? In other words, they had all those names, each of them. I mean, the simple understanding, of course, is that it was the same person. And that's what the Gemara seems to imply. But I think there might be a Malbim or one of the maybe there must be some other understanding over there. I remember looking up that Gemara where it talks about those names, that there might be another understanding as well, or maybe an Abarbanel about it. In any event, what I was going to mention, so we have these different exiles, that the 10 tribes were exiled in. And again, our verse in chapter 17 talks about the final exile. Chapter 15, we spoke about one of the earlier exiles, but we do know that there were really three. And this is before the destruction. It's maybe 100 years before the actual destruction of the temple and the exile of Benjamin and Judah. That's a different story. I will also mention that the Gemara in Megillah tells us that there was a situation where they found a Sefer Torah opened up, and they had gone to Huldah Hanaviah. They went to a prophetess, Huldah. I mean, this is a pasuk that we'll soon see in Malachim, but it's brought in the Gemara there. And it mentioned, the Gemara asks, why did they go to Huldah if Jeremiah, who was the much more popular prophet, why did they go ask Jeremiah about this? The fact that they had opened up to the it was the rebuke. There was a verse about the rebuke, about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And so Yoshiyahu HaMelech, who we'll soon learn about, he had asked Huldah, what does this mean? And the Gemara there says the reason they didn't go to Jeremiah, one of the answers is because Jeremiah was not in town. He had gone out to bring back the 10 tribes. So there is a understanding that at least some of the people from the 10 tribes did come back to the Jewish people. And even though we know they were exiled, but Jeremiah at some point brought some of them back. And that's why he wasn't there at the time to explain the meaning of this situation of finding this Torah scroll opened up to a certain place. And instead they went to Huldah Hanaviah, the prophetess Huldah. Now, there is a big discussion in the Gemara, and this is a major topic of interest among the great scholars and all historians. What happened to the 10 tribes? Where are they now? And are they ever going to come back? What will be of them? They are our cousins. And if you think about it, we are only 2 of the tribes. 10 tribes are missing. Think about the Holocaust. This was worse than the Holocaust. The Holocaust was 6 million. This was 80% of the Jewish people. This was almost the entire Jewish people that was exiled. We don't know where they are. And in the Gemara, there's an argument if they are going to come back or not. There's Rebbe Akiva who says they are not coming back. And you have the other opinion in the Gemara that is Rebbe Eliezer, and he says that the 10 tribes eventually will be reunited with the rest of the people. Now, on the surface, that sounds very, very scary. Like they are not coming back. They sinned so drastically that they will not return. However, the commentaries, even Rashi mentions that even Rabbi Akiva doesn't mean that they won't come back and they're lost forever. But what it means is that generation, their children will come back. Their grandchildren will come back. It just means that the generation of the exile, maybe they were thoroughly wicked. They maybe will not be reunited, but the descendants will be reunited. So that is based on the Gemara. It's also a Gemara in Sanhedrin, a little later from the other Gemara that Mordechai mentioned. But there are many sources that there will be 12 tribes in the future. When Mashiach comes, we're going to have 12 tribes. Israel's going to be divided into 12 and 12 portions, and so the book of Ezekiel mentions such a thing. So there definitely is a concept of the 12 tribes coming back, which fits with the way Rashi explains that Gemara, that it's only the argument of Rabbi Akiva is only about the actual generation itself that was full of sin. Now, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but I did want to make sure that you were aware of this. It's a very important insight. Maybe I might have mentioned it because it did come up before. It's a very interesting concept in psychology, really. See, what happened was Yeravam, the origin of the 10 tribes, who was the first king of the 10 tribes, was Jeroboam, Yeravam the first. We actually had two Yeravams, but this is the first Yeravam. Who's there? Who's there? Sorry about that. Okay, so there was the first Yeravam actually had uh, uh, um, been the first king of the 10 tribes. Now, he was anointed by Achia Hashiloni, Achia the prophet, but no one knew about that. It was unknown. The 10 tribes came to him and said, "We don't like Rechavam, King Solomon's son. We want you to be our king." So what happened? Yeravam, of course, knew that he was anointed by Achia Hashiloni, and now he sees these people coming to him and saying, "We want you to be our king." So he goes for it. However, the problem is that the people who decided they want him to be their king, they were not aware of the prophecy that this was sent by Hashem. They were appointing Yeravam on their own because that prophecy was given over to Yeravam in a quiet and a hidden way, because, of course, if it would have created publicity about it, Rechavam might have gone after Achia Hashiloni and said, "You're rebelling against me." So it had to be done. It was done in a private way, or for whatever reason, it was done in a private way. I'm sharing the thought that maybe it was done because it would have been dangerous to do it otherwise. Maybe God wanted it to be done privately. But the 10 tribes, they on their own went to Yeravam and said, "We want you to be our king," and he agreed. Now, the proper way that this should have been done is they should have first gone to the prophets and asked the prophets, "We want a different king. We would like Yeravam. Can you ask Hashem? Can you ask Hashem if we could maybe have a different king? We're not satisfied with Rechavam. He's not doing the proper thing. He seems to be arrogant, and he's not, he's doing things against the will of the people, and it's not a good relationship." And we would like, so that's the way they should have done it. Instead, they went on their own to Yeravam. Now, what did that do? Think about it psychologically. Yeravam was now appointed by the people in a certain sense without feeling, without the knowledge. The people didn't have the knowledge that this was meant from Hashem. So he was paranoid that they're going to just drop him if he doesn't do something right. He had that paranoia because it wasn't coming from Hashem. If they had known that this was coming from Hashem, Yeravam would have been more comfortable and confident about himself. But because he was coming from the people, he wasn't confident about himself, and he was nervous. What did that cause him to do? It caused him to create a whole new religion almost, where he blocked people from going to be Oila Regel, to go do the pilgrimage and go to the Beis Hamikdash and bring their sacrifices there. He had to do things in order to prevent people from dropping him and acting fickle in just saying, oh, you know what, we don't like you. We're gonna be faithful to some other king, or we're gonna go back to the other. He was too nervous. It was the paranoia. Why did he have this paranoia? Because it all boiled down to the fact that it didn't come from Hashem, at least in the people's minds, and he knew that. And because he knew that, it ended up that he created a whole it created a whole new, almost like new religion, where he stopped people from going to the the Beis Hamikdash. He had to block the route. He had to put servants there, or slave, people, policemen, to block the way. And I believe at certain points, at least in the history of the 10 tribes, it was even punishable by death if anyone went there. And he even created these two calves that were meant for people to go there and bring their sacrifices. So he created like his own alternative place of worship, a place of bringing sacrifices. So it all boiled down to the sin of the people and the sin of the sin of the people and the sin of Yeravam of doing this. But it also was very connected to the paranoia involved. And now we're gonna see this inside. So we're gonna start in verse 20. So we're in chapter 17 of the book of Kings 2, chapter 17, verse 20. So Hashem rejected the entire offspring of Israel and oppressed them. He delivered them into the hands of plunderers until he had cast them away from his presence. For Israel had torn itself away from the house of David, crowning Yeravam the son of Nevat over themselves. And Yeravam pushed Israel away from following Hashem and caused them to commit a grave sin. Look at verse 21 and think about what I just shared with you. Verse 21 is basically saying that the Israel tore itself away from the house of David. And you would normally ask a question: Israel tore itself away from the house of David? Achia Hashiloini, the prophet, told Yeravam, you're going to be king. But the answer is no. Achia maybe did actually do that. Achia Hashiloini, it's true. He told Yeravam, you are king. But the Israelites chose Yeravam on their own without knowing about Achia's choice of Achia's choice of Yeravam. And therefore, verse 21 here in chapter 17, verse 21 says Israel tore itself away from the house of David. It's not that Achia chose him. It's that Israel themselves, they tore themselves. They crowned Yeravam ben Nevat over themselves. And Yeravam ended up pushing Israel away from following Hashem, all because it started with Israel not asking Hashem if they could have Yeravam as a king. Instead, they thought they're doing it on their own. That caused Yeravam to have the paranoia that people are just going to leave him. And therefore he had to protect himself, or felt obligated to protect himself, by building these, by making the golden calves, setting them up, and preventing people from being Oila Regel, doing the pilgrimage. And so had the people acted right, it might have caused Yeravam not to make these. In other words, if the people would have gone to a prophet and said, prophet, please ask Hashem if we could get another king for the 10 kings, 10 tribes, because Rechavam is not doing his job. That would have actually switched everything around. So it boiled down in the beginning sort of from the sin of the Israelites. It didn't start with Yeravam necessarily. It started with the Israelites. And Yeravam, because of the paranoia, which made sense, because he realized that he didn't have them completely under his authority, that's what caused him to have to feel so threatened and paranoid. Now, it does also mention that it was and Yeravam pushed Israel away, so he's guilty as well. I mean, look at what he did, but his guilt. But it starts off with Israel's sin. This is an explanation given by the Abarbanel, really a beautiful insight into the psychology of what came out of this situation, and this is the end of it. This is where it ended, and it caused such a drastic measures to be taken against the 10 tribes, and they were exiled. Now, verse 22, the children of Israel went in the way of all the sins of Jeroboam, which he committed. They did not turn away from them until, this is verse 23. Now, what does it mean they went in the way of the sins of Jeroboam, which he committed, and they did not turn away from them? What it really means is that even after Hoshea ben Elah removed the policemen from blocking people from going to the Beis Hamikdash, they still continued in the sins of Yerovam. And it was until Hoshea removed them, they had no choice. But now they even had a choice, and yet they've already, they already got so used to not going to the Beis Hamikdash. So even after Hoshea removed them, they continued in that way, which really did seal their doom, because until now they could blame it on the king, and now they're to blame themselves. So they went in the way of the sins of Yeroboam, which he committed. They did not turn away from them. Verse 23, until Hashem removed Israel from his presence, as he had spoken through the hand of all his servants, the prophets. So Israel went into exile from their land to Ashur, to Syria, to this day. Now, the discussion of that I mentioned in the beginning of this class is really based on this. It's really, this is the discussion. That discussion is based on this verse of the fact that Israel went into exile from their land to this day. Like, are they ever coming back? And this is an argument between, again, it's Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Eliezer. This is what we spoke about a little earlier. And we mentioned that Rashi explains that even Rabbi Akiva doesn't mean that the 10 tribes are never coming back. It means that their descendants will come back. It means they themselves who sinned so drastically, they might not merit the world to come, the resurrection of the dead, and so on. But everyone else, ultimately, they will come back. And I also did mention that Gemara in Megillah, where, interestingly enough, it mentions that Jeremiah brought back some of the 10 tribes at a certain point. Of course, it leaves very vague. Why did he only get some of them? What was the reason behind it? How was he able to get them to come back? It definitely keeps the mystery, keeps it a big mystery. The story of the 10 tribes, and where are they? Of course, over the generations, over the centuries, in the millennia, they've looked for these tribes to try to find them. This is before the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. So, there's always been the discussion of, is it this country or is it that country? And many people try to claim they're from the 10 tribes, and they want Israel to accept them as converts, as proper, as Jewish people, not even as converts. We are part of the 10 tribes, but of course it's really a big question to. It seems like it's impossible for us to find them. And then the next part of this chapter talks about those that resettled in Israel after the Jewish people had left. Again, we're dealing with the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom is still in Israel, maybe 100 years more, but the northern kingdom has been exiled, and they're basically gone. And this is the final exile that we're talking about. Again, we once mentioned a while back that there were 3 exiles of the 10 tribes. Interestingly enough, there were also a few exiles of the other 2 tribes. It also did not happen in one shot. But the exile of the 10 tribes says there were 3 of them, and there's a discussion in the commentaries exactly who were the first and who was the second. The third seems basically means the rest of the tribes. But there was we have the tribes of the 10 tribes. Some of them were on the eastern side of the Jordan, so some say those were the ones who came first to exile, and and then and then the other tribes were the Naphtali that we saw in chapter 15. That was the other tribe, Naphtali, maybe Zvulun with Naphtali. Those were the other 2 tribes. Some say maybe they went first to exile, and really Reuven, those on the eastern side of the Jordan, maybe they were the second exile. But however you want to learn it, ultimately there were 3 exiles, and and this is the final exile of the 10 tribes. So now the king of Ashur is going to settle other people in these cities of the Shomron. We're in verse 24 over here. The king of Assyria, the king of Ashur, brought people from Babylonia, in Kuta, in Ava, in Hamas, and Sfarvayim, and he settled them in the cities of the Shomron, Samaria, and they settled in its cities. Now, um, the reason the king of Ashur did this, as we've seen, is he didn't, when he conquered places, he liked to resettle the people. Because if you leave them where they are, they could rebel. It's better if you remove them, if you take them away, they lose their feeling, their nationality perspective, and they are less likely to rebel, and they're also not as comfortable and confident where they are, and so I guess it's easier for a king to um, uh, to have them to win them over and move them around and not feel threatened from them if you don't leave them where they are. So he settled all of these countries into the Shomron, and we often call them by the name Kutim. Why do we call them Kutim and not the other names? I don't know. Really, it's maybe majority of the people were from Kuta, but the verse 24 mentions there were people from Babylon, from Kuta, from Ava, Hamas. There were other cities as well. Somehow we seem to latch on to the name Kutim. Um, and it happened that at the beginning of the period of their dwelling uh, there, they did not fear Hashem, and Hashem incited lions against them, and they were killing among them. So this is the story of the lions, and we've heard about this. We've studied about this in the Gemara, and the concept that there were a group of people called the Kutim that were called Gerei Arayos, at least according to some opinions. They the Gemara talks about them, their conversion to Judaism, that they converted because they were afraid of the lions. And if they converted because they were afraid of the lions, that would mean that their conversion is not valid. Because a convert has to be sincere about his conversion. And if they convert for the wrong reasons and they're not sincere about it, so it's not really acceptance of the commandments. Now, the verse over here mentions that Hashem incited lions and they were killing among them. And this was at the beginning of their dwelling. And it says they did not fear Hashem. So the commentaries here, Rashi among them, mention that they didn't fear Hashem, even though most of the countries did fear Hashem. These countries didn't. What was the difference? Why did these countries have less fear of Hashem than the other countries? And what does that mean? The other countries really feared Hashem? So the understanding is, Rashi does spell it out a little. He says that all the countries, they always knew that they're worshiping idols, and they understood that their idols have some power, but Hashem is in charge of all of all of this. Hashem above all the idols, and he's called the God of the gods. And so they believed in their idols, but they knew they did have like a, sort of like a external trust, faith that God is in charge. These nations didn't even feel that way. Why didn't they? Why didn't the Kutim feel about Hashem why didn't they have an understanding that Hashem is in charge? And the answer is because look at the fact that the Jewish people were exiled by Ashur. The fact that the Jewish people were suffered exile by Ashur, to them, that was a final seal on the fact that there is no Jewish God. And the God of the Jewish people is not what we thought. Maybe they originally thought that there was such a, but when they saw the exile, they said that's over. In fact, this is one of the claims we always use to Hashem when we beg Hashem to return us to our land and to redeem us and save us. We tell him, don't do it for us. Maybe we don't have enough merit, but do it for your own name. Look at the name you created for yourself. Your people are in exile. It looks like you're incapable, Hashem. It looks like that you're not able to save us. Do it for your own name. Aseh laman shemecha. Do it for your name, Hashem. And so that's the meaning over here, where it says they didn't fear Hashem, meaning they were even worse than other nations. They had less fear of Hashem than the other nations. And Hashem incited lions against them. Now, the commentaries mention that there was something unique about the way these lions devoured them, or killed them, I should say. What was different about the way, why did they, verse 26 says that they spoke to the king of, check out verse 26. They spoke to the king of Ashur, Assyria, saying, the nations that you have exiled and settled in the cities of Shomron do not know the law of the God of the land. He has incited lions against them, and they are now killing them because they do not know the law of the God of the land. They realize something strange. Now, why did they realize this? What do you mean? In the olden days, lions and tigers and bears and other dangerous animals were, it wasn't unheard of for them to find themselves, some at certain points in the populated areas. Of course, it wasn't maybe populated areas had it less. Generally they don't like populated areas. But what was so? Why did they believe there's something sent from Hashem? Why did they realize? How did they realize this? So on a simple level, of course, it was much more. Statistically, it was just much more than they ever were used to, just percentage wise. Just the amount of murder, amount of people dying from lions probably was much more. But the commentaries mention another point. Based on Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, one of the midrashic writings, that the lions did not actually eat the people; they killed them and left them. Lions normally they kill for food; they kill and eat their prey. Here, they were just killing them and leaving them on the side. So this made them realize that um, there must be something.
Rabbi, these what you're talking about, you're saying that these lions didn't eat the people, but they
They
were
killed
not
them.
lions. They were sent by Hashem to remove these people. So they were not like a real lion. They were sent from God sent these creatures to remove these people. They were not like lions, like what we know. That's not the point.
Yeah, Susan, the way you're understanding it is God created lions just for this purpose. That's not the understanding here. There are lions. God doesn't have to not to
But you
create a
understand what I'm
miraculous.
saying? That
Yeah, you're living in a robotic world of AI,
no, I'm not talking about that.
and you're thinking that God created lions, and you're right, God could. Let me just mute everyone. Let me just mute everyone. Now you're not wrong. God could create lions that are not the typical lions that we know of, and they weren't born from a mother and father lion. He could create them, and you're right, that's true. And would those lions would be lions that don't eat people, that they just kill. But God didn't do that in this story because God doesn't like to make crazy miracles. God took the lions from the jungle and from the forests and directed them to this area and the populated area. And so he didn't create new lions. These are regular lions, but they happen to have a certain mission of killing people that they normally were not doing unless they were hungry for food. And so that is why this is so surprising to the people, in that they sort of like woke up and said, whoa, it must be God is sending us some message. I hope that answers your question, Susan. So that's the story here. Now, there is a very important point to make over here. Why did Hashem do this? He, the nations of the world, I mean, many of them don't really worship Hashem. And there must be many nations out there that don't even believe Hashem is the king of all kings. And why did Hashem specifically punish these nations that were living in Israel? All the nations knew, the other nations were aware that the 10 tribes were kicked out of their land. So many nations were aware of this fact, that maybe God of the Jewish people doesn't, like maybe they believe that that the Jewish God doesn't exist, because they also saw, not just these countries, the other nations also knew about what Ashur did to the 10 tribes. And so it would make sense that other nations should also stop believing in the God of the Jewish people. So what was unique about this? Why was this sin worse than any other nation that was aware of this story and maybe also didn't believe in Hashem being the king of all, the God of all gods? Why didn't the lions eat them up? So commentaries mention a very interesting point, and that is that a prince who's brought up in the palace with the wealth and the purity of delicate everything that he sees and feels and eats, everything is so like perfect and clean. So if he eats something that's a little spoiled, he'll vomit it right away. A regular person, they used to, they eat a little from the floor, they get used to. In the palace, you'd never eat anything from the floor, even though the floor in the palace is maybe more clean than the cleanest house. But nevertheless, that they're just not used to that, and they're not able to handle anything that's not perfect. So the same thing is the land of Israel. The land of Israel cannot tolerate anyone that's involved in sin, and therefore, when these people were moved to the land of Shomron, which is part of the land of Israel, when they had been exiled there. These are the people from Kuta, from Babylon, from Ava, Chamos, Sfarvayim. They had gone to Israel, and they're not believing in Hashem. So what's happening is the land of Israel is vomiting them. They're dying. It can't handle this. The land of Israel can't handle such sin. And this is a unique holiness that the land of Israel has, that it's so pure and holy that it wouldn't be able to handle these type of people. And this also explains why, like, Egypt was also so full of abominable acts and so on, and yet they were not, they were not consumed by lions and so on. And but nevertheless, these people were, and so this is also an interesting thing that I've seen. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was asked a number of times from people who had become religious, and they said, we want to move to the land of Israel and make Aliyah. And so the Rebbe used to often answer them that to go make Aliyah right when you become religious is not really a perfect choice now. You should wait till you're very committed in every mitzvah that you do and fulfilling all the mitzvahs properly, because the land of Israel is a very holy land that it cannot handle a sin. A sin in Israel is a lot worse than a sin outside of Israel. And obviously all sins are bad, but to wait until you're solid in serving Hashem, you learn through the regular daily laws of how to serve Hashem, and you're familiar, you're well acquainted. Don't jump to Israel before you're ready to keep all the mitzvahs properly, before you're aware of all the mitzvahs, because a sin in Eretz Yisrael is a lot worse than a sin outside of Israel. And that's based on this idea here that we see that the land of Israel can't handle such sin. Now, so what did they do? They went to the king and told him that, we got to figure out what to do. So and what the God of the land, what's the story? So verse 27, the king of Ashur, Syria, issued a command saying, bring to there one of the Kohanim whom you exiled from there, and let them go and settle there and teach them the law of the God of the land. So they're bringing a Kohen that was exiled, Higlisem Misham, who was exiled from there, and bring him there to and teach them the law of the God of the land. There's a big discussion in the commentaries. Who is this Kohen that they're bringing? They're going to bring this Kohen, and so was it a regular Kohen? And we know also that many of the Kohanim who were among the 10 tribes, they actually left to the southern kingdom when they saw the sins that were going on, and they saw the problems of the 10 tribes. They ran away to the 10, and they decided to be part of the two tribes in the southern kingdom instead of in the northern kingdom. But so one of the commentaries understands this to be a regular Kohen, and, as a regular Jewish Kohen, And they're going to have him teach them the proper way. Another understanding is that he was a Kohen that worships idols. A Kohen was an idolater. Was not a real Jewish, regular Jew, but someone who worshipped idols. And then there is an interpretation here that it means someone who was a priest at the houses of worship that Yeravam had set up, the golden calves. So one of the priests from there, that's who the king of Ashur decided to bring to teach the Jewish people, how to get around the problem of the lions. So different understandings again. What type of priest we're dealing with? What does this mean, a Kohen? But there definitely is an understanding that he was a regular Jew. There is such a understanding. And what does he tell them? So one of the Kohanim whom they had exiled from Shomron came and settled in Beis El. We're in verse 28. And he would teach them how to fear Hashem. So this is what's happening. Whoever this Kohen is, whether it's a Jewish person, a Kohen, or worships Hashem, or someone who worshipped the calves, the golden calves of Yeravam, or it was just an idolater, either however it is, Kohen of idolatry, seemingly a non-Jewish Kohen, but basically they're going to teach the Kutim how to serve Hashem. So one of them came and he would teach them how to fear Hashem, and they would make, verse 29, they would make each nation its own god, and they set up their idols in the high places in the high place temples that the Shomronim had built, each nation in their cities where they dwelled. Now that's interesting. They had their own god. They had their idols, They put it in the high places called the Beis Habamais, and these locations where like these churches or these houses of worship. Asher Asu Hashem Roinim, Goy Ba'areim, each nation in their city, and where they dwelled. And the people of Babylonia made Sukkos Benoth, people of Kuta made Nergol, the people of Hamas made Ashima, the Avites made Nivchaz and Tartok, the Svarvim, they would burn their children in fire, to Adra Melech and Ana Melech, the gods of the Svarvayim. They feared Hashem, and they appointed some from among themselves as priests for the high places, and they would perform the rituals for them in the high place temples. So what does this mean? They feared Hashem, and they had their idols. So the understanding is, and of course there's a lot of discussion over here, but the understanding is that they were taught, they're not Jewish, but they were taught that they should accept at least Hashem is in charge of everything. And if they want to worship their own idols, sort of like as emissaries of Hashem, that's okay. They're not Jewish. And this is the understanding. It's called Shittuf. Shittuf means that there's a concept of partnership that Goyim are allowed to believe. And that's a famous question. Are Goyim allowed to believe in Christianity? Is that acceptable according to Jewish law for a non-Jew? See, we don't believe that non-Jews have to serve Hashem the way we do. In fact, they're not allowed to. They're not allowed to keep Shabbos. There's laws not really supposed to learn Torah. At least many parts of Torah they're not supposed to learn. But But the question is, are they allowed to, worship the way they worship, like things like Christianity or even Islam, and so on. And so, believing, as long as they believe in Hashem, at least according to Ashkenazic rules, as long as they believe in Hashem, they are allowed to also believe in shituf, partnership with other gods. So that's okay for a non-Jew to believe. They might be foolish, they might be stupid, and it doesn't mean it's correct. Of course, it's not. But if they believe that, they're not punished, because Hashem did not expect the non-Jews to serve him the same way he served, that same way his nation, same way the Jewish people serve Hashem. But according to the Rambam, according to Sephardic sources, a non-Jew is not allowed to believe in shituf either. That even a non-Jew is not allowed to believe in a partnership with Hashem. That someone is like a additional god or so on. So according to the Rambam, I'm not exactly sure how the Rambam understands this story, but I mean, it's very possible that the way the Rambam learns it is that this was not done by a Jewish kohen who knew halacha. It was done by either Yeravam's, he's probably learning, like the other opinions, that it was either a priest from Yeravam's golden calves, or or a priest of the idolatry, and he was telling them that they can do this. And seemingly, the fact that they're at least acknowledging Hashem, so therefore Hashem stopped sending the lions to kill them. Now Rashi goes through each of these idols, and the people of Babylon, they made what's called Sukkos Benois, and Rashi says that's some type of a chicken with its with the little the babies, and it's chicks, and the nergal is a rooster, and from the word tarnagoyl, or a wild hen, and the ashima is the goat, and basically it's called ashima. It's somehow has no wool, and so it's a goat. Nivchaz, verse 31 was they made this god Nivchaz, a barking dog. Naiveachaz, that Tartuk, a donkey. Adar Melech is a Adra Melech, a mule. Rashi brings over here Adra Melech, the most fered, a mule, and Ana Melech, Rashi says, is the most sus, it's a horse. And basically, the Kutim then feared Hashem, and verse 30 they feared Hashem. They appointed some from among themselves as priests for the high places, and they would perform the rituals for them in the high places. So this verse, they feared Hashem, and they appointed some from among themselves as priests for the high places, and they would perform the rituals for them in the high places. Okay. And then verse 33, they feared Hashem, but they worshiped their own gods as well, according to the practice of the nations from which they had been exiled. So, they continued worshiping their exiles from what they were used to, but they did adopt these laws of Hashem. It is brought down that they were instructed also to be careful about things that are abominable by Hashem, such as immoral acts, and so they were taught against doing those things as well, any like immoral marriage, incest, and things like that. That's the understanding that it's the fear, how to fear Hashem. Now, there is a very sad way of interpreting this verse 33, that it refers to the Jewish people, the 10 tribes, that when they traveled to the other nations, they feared Hashem, but they worshipped their own gods as well, according to the practice of the nations from which they had been exiled, and according to the practice of the nations whom they had it means whom the Assyrians had exiled. Again, you have to like translate it a little differently, and which basically means that they blended with the idol worship of the other nations. And so it's basically referring to the Jewish people. Now, verse, what are we up to over here? Let me read this verse again. Verse 34. Until this day, they act according to the original practice. They do not fear Hashem sincerely. They do not act according to their customs and their practices, or according to the Torah and the commandments that Hashem had commanded the children of Yaakov, whose name he had changed to Israel. Yeah, we're going to stop here, and we'll conclude here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.